we've got a bunch of really interesting people here, and we want this to be a very interactive session. So we've got a bunch of stuff prepared, but we're perfectly happy to do some ad-libbing. What we really hope is it will be a good discussion. So I'm a big believer in serendipity. And when I look around the participant list, I see some really interesting people. So we want to be sure and have lots and lots of conversation. So I noticed, for example, Richard Brown logged in. And are you here, Richard? Can you unmute and say hi? Maybe not. We'll get him to unmute later. So Richard.
Yes, I just unmuted.
Oh, awesome. So Richard is, I guess, the founder of a project called the Pandemic Journaling Project, which is actually one of the inspirations. So
I'm not actually the founder. I had a role in it, but two anthropologist colleagues founded it.
So it's serendipitous. I didn't know where Richard was coming. So it's good. As I say, one of the neat things about going to meetings like this is you run into people in the hall and say, wow, I didn't know you were going to be here. Cool. So do you want to spend like 30 seconds and tell us a little bit about the Pandemic Journaling Project?
I think I just muted him. Hang on a second. There we go.
The Pandemic Project now includes something like 7,000 people, I believe, mostly Anglophone from around the world, chiefly the United States and Canada. And the idea of it is, with the onset of the pandemic, people recognized that this was a unique experience, they hope a unique experience, and one that was of historic magnitude, and that it would be useful for them personally and perhaps collectively for future generations to understand how people experienced the pandemic, what the term lockdown meant, what various stages of development they went through, both physically and psychologically, how the news unfolded around them, whatever they might choose to include in their journals. And so the anthropologists, however, worked out a system for, with a set of questions that people were invited to respond to. They were also set up in such a way that the journals could be analyzed as to the socioeconomic status, ethnic status, and so on of the people who were creating journals, what were the particular experiences of certain groups, age, ethnicity, geographic location, those kinds of things, and also how was the experience affecting them over time. And they're invited to produce a journal entry weekly, more often if they wish, but certainly weekly. And the project hoped that they would respond to the questions in such a way that there would be comparable responses from a wide variety of people.
So one of the things that's really interesting about the Pandemic Journaling Project is if you go there and you look at it, so it's open, you can go, you can participate, or you can just kind of read what people have put up. One of the things that people are putting up are some really compelling photographs. And that's very much one of the things that we're going to be talking about here. So I want to begin by talking a little bit about science and narrative. So Censor is one of my favorite groups. It's got wonderful people, which is the most important thing. But the basic shtick of Censor is we want to teach science in the context of civic engagement, public policy questions, personal questions, and that's absolutely wonderful. So one of the things we've been talking a lot about is science and narrative. And I want to make 3 quick points about science and narrative. So the first reason I think they go together is that science is a language. It's just like English or any verbal language. It's like the visual arts. It gives us the power to express, communicate, and persuade. It gives us the power to work with ideas. So science in itself is a language for narrative. The second thing I think it's really important is that as science educators, we're not selling science. I don't know anybody who wants to buy the quadratic formula, even though I'm a mathematician. What we are selling is the life of a scientist, and that is a compelling narrative. So we really want to talk about what it's like to be a scientist. So Mariana and I, for example, have talked an awful lot about the idea of a class should feel a little bit like a game that students are playing. So as you play some of these games, you build up your powers, and that's very much building up the skills of a math class or a statistics class. Once you've got those powers, you go out on a series of quests. So very much we're selling the narrative of what it's like to be a scientist. And the third thing, of course, is the art of narration is always developed hand in hand with science. So many of the most creative artists are scientists. You think Leonardo da Vinci, many of the most creative scientists are artists. So they really do fit together. So the project, oops, I clicked go ahead twice. So the project's called Grassroots History and the Arts and Science. And the idea is we want to start out small. So the idea is we've got 15-minute units that you can add to an individual class hour. You can add longer optional classes, projects, again, to an existing class. So individually, each of these projects is small. Each of these things we can do is small, but collectively they can be transformative. So what we want to do is we want to have our students begin to think of themselves as historians, as diarists. And we're going to build their narrative powers. We're going to build their ability to share understanding and empathy across cultural divides, something we really need. We want to build a sense of self for them to appreciate where they are in the context of history. And we want to build a sense of community. So very much, we're thinking that eventually it might be raw material for more formal histories, more like things like the pandemic journaling project is doing. But for now, at least, we're starting small. So one of the easiest things to do is, I always start out my day by looking at the New York Times and the Washington Post and a couple of other things. And I look for some of the images that people are using. So here is an image that appeared in the New York Times this morning. And I'm going to let you, I hope you can read that. The idea is that I would start and show this in a class and talk about it. So this is from an editorial by Nick Kristof, and I agree with everything he says. So for example, he says the most revolutionary part of President Biden's agenda so far is his focus on a constituency that doesn't write whiny op-eds, doesn't vote, doesn't hire lobbyists, and so has been neglected for half a century. Children. Biden's proposal to establish a national pre-K and child care system would be a huge step forward for children and working parents alike. It would make it easier for moms and dads to hold jobs. And above all, it would be a lifeline for many disadvantaged children. Imagine you drop a kid off at a high quality pre-kindergarten program in the morning, pick the child up on the way home from work. That's how it is in many other advanced countries and in the United States military. I agree with everything. That's absolutely wonderful. What really made me stop short and think was that picture that went with it. So I look at this picture, and it seems to me one of the things about imagery is it communicates on a subliminal method level as well as a obvious level. And what this picture conveys to me is when this kid is not in a formal pre-K system or something like that, he's living in a world that's really monochromatic. If you look at that world, it's above all dull. It's not exciting. There's no color in it. Those streets are empty. It's out of focus. And that to me is actually the opposite of what I think we want our students to begin to see. We want to see their life in school, their life in learning as part of what they're doing in their everyday life. So I thought what we'd do is we'd start out and just have kind of a general discussion. We can kind of use our chat, and I think it'll work out all right. We're a small enough group, so I think we can talk and actually have people talk about what they see in this picture. Different people will see different things, And let's just open it up and let people chat a little bit about this. Anybody want to chat? Just feel free to.
Maybe I'll jump in. I've noticed some people in the chat saying that it looks bleak and lonely, but I think I had like sort of an opposite reaction to that, where I see this like young person who is like part of the city, and like maybe it's because that looks like a block I used to live on. Even though there aren't people, I can kind of like hear the noises. There's like a delivery truck. There are people inside that supermarket. So for me, I think it's kind of an opposite reaction to the one that you had.
I was thinking that the word supermarket today connects me to Boulder, Colorado, and the terrible event that happened there a couple of days ago. So I saw this child standing alone, looking at the supermarket, and it might be a place of danger. It might be a familiar place. You just see the back of the child's head. It's obviously a white child. What is the child thinking? You can speculate about that. You don't know.
Ursula said it also reminds me of myself. Ursula, I wonder if you can elaborate on that.
Let me unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, you know, I was a kid who grew up in a small town, and the supermarket for me was like, you know, wonder place. We would go there and just look at the, you know, windows and see what is inside. We never had any money to buy anything, but this was almost like a window to possibility, you know, just seeing that one day, maybe I will be able, you know, to go there and buy a book, you know, putting away some little coins. So that was my first impression of this picture.
So this is really interesting. I think for me, the overarching message is that this picture is something that's open to many different interpretations. So one of the things that strikes me about the visual arts is that you're hearing the words I say in the order I say them. If you're reading the words I write, you read them generally in the order they're written. But in a picture, you're presented with all this information all at once. And when you do eye tracking experiments, for example, you see that people look around at different parts of the pictures. They're essentially constructing their own meaning. So I think that's actually really interesting. So let me click and go on to the next one. Oh, so I mentioned that one of the first things I do in the morning is look at the newspaper and see what pictures are there. There's a URL here at the bottom, which is really interesting. So if we ever get to meet in person, I suggest we go meet at the Whitney, which has a really interesting exhibit right now, and the URL is down there. And I'll actually leave it on there for a couple minutes, a couple of seconds. I would contrast the pictures in her exhibit with the one we just saw, and to see how other people might visually convey the idea of what's going on in a city or during the pandemic. So, as they say next year in Jerusalem, maybe next month or the month after, we'll all meet at the Whitney. So here's another example. It was actually the one I was originally going to start with. This comes from the Washington Post, and there were two articles, I should say two pieces, that appeared actually within inches of each other on the front page. They both talk about the same thing. They talk about the fight that's going on in the schools right now about what's being taught. So the first piece, the one on the left, was written by George Will, and it's an editorial. And he begins by saying, the worst governed state, Illinois, had triple the population loss of the state with the second highest outmigration between 2010 and 2020, is contemplating another incentive for flight. And that picture conveys George Will's picture of government, or at least the Illinois government. That picture for me is straight out of horror movie photography 101. You're looking up an empty street, there are converging lines to an almost monochromatic and somewhat forbidding looking building. This is the point at which you're telling the kids that are knocking on the door and about to go and turn around and run. And that really conveys to me a very forbidding picture of state government. And that is an editorial. On the right, there's a piece that appeared in the education section by Marissa Lotte, and this is now a news piece. And she's talking about what essentially is the same thing. And now that picture to me is very much like a political Rorschach test. It immediately conveys to you the tension that's going on. This discussion is taking place in a context where the country is badly divided. It's almost a political Rorschach test. I think people will look at that and see very, very different things in it. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how these pictures subliminally convey some of the information that the people want to convey verbally. Okay, so one of the things that's really interesting is that all of our students now are carrying around, not all, but many of them are carrying around cell phones that have these marvelous cameras. And they're incredibly powerful and they're always with you. So one of the ideas is that students begin to essentially keep journals, visual journals. They're walking around, maybe they don't have time to pull out a notebook and make some notes, but they do have time to step off the road, take a picture, that picture goes into their album and they've got it later. So these are incredibly powerful tools. And the idea is that we want our students to begin to use them. So I'm going to pass it over now to Colleen Woolpert. One of the neat things about the pandemic for me is I got to meet people that I might not have met otherwise. Colleen is a former photojournalist and an editorial photographer. She teaches classes and she runs workshops helping students develop their ability to use imagery for creative storytelling. She's got many cool installations. One of my goals is to go up. Colleen, is well, you'll tell us, is your installation up in Syracuse still up there? But really cool stuff. And we met over a shared interest in 3D photography. So one of the things I think we want our students to do is begin to see their lives, their current events in a historical context. And one of the ways of doing that is to have them look at 3D photography and that museum history. So I'm going to pass this over to Colleen now.
Colleen, you're muted. Can you hear me now?
We got you.
Okay, good deal. Can you see my screen share? Okay, great. First, I just want to say thanks for having me, and thanks, Frank, for inviting me. You talked about science, and I'm an artist first and foremost, an interdisciplinary artist, but I think there's a lot of overlap between the fields, and I'm interested in artwork that can generate questions, but not necessarily testing theories to find the right answer, but generate more questions. And right now, I want to talk about one facet of my work, which is stereophotography. Or I could say, looking at this, I'm going to talk about VR, but the origins of VR and how you can bring that history into the classroom. So here we have an illustration, Norman Rockwell, of somebody looking through a stereoscope at a stereograph. But 3D photography goes back to actually the late 1830s. And this is an image inside of a store in New York City. People are collecting their stereo views in 1850s. The heyday of stereophotography was 1850s to 1930, about when the Viewmaster came along. This is often people's introduction to 3D photography. The stereographs are those cards with the two images that look like the same thing, but I want you to look at, this is a towpath along the Erie Canal. And if you're looking at the handrail where it meets the water, you can see that the perspective is slightly shifted between the left view and the right view. So what's happening is a left view is captured and a right view is captured with a stereo camera or with a single lens camera that's slid along a slide bar.
This image is probably from the 1870s. And what's different about stereo photography is that it's incredibly immersive. As you know, if you've experienced VR or looked at these old Stereograph cards, you know, you feel like you're entering the photograph and walking down that street. So it's a pretty incredible experience, and we can bring it into the present as well. The stereo camera went out to capture those street scenes, but also inside places like this is the Michigan Asylum for the Insane. I had recently produced an exhibition. I brought these images out of our local archive and framed them and matted them and presented them to the public with a stereoscopic viewer. This is a stereograph depicting the embalming surgeon in the Civil War. And prior to this, we had illustrations, just woodblock prints going into newspapers. So photography was revolutionary, but 3D photography made you feel like you were there. Here's the viewer again. It's called a stereoscope. I just want to delineate these terms. And the stereograph is the card. Okay, what does binocular vision have to do with it? This gets into the science in a very particular way, because now we're talking about how the eyes function. So we get a left eye view and a right eye view, and it's the brain that's actually doing the work of fusing those images together to create the depth perception. But not everyone can see in 3D. I'm a twin, so I'm one half of a stereo image, and this is partly why I'm so in love with this technology. But also my twin has monocular vision. You can see in this picture, the girl with the glasses, one of her eyes is looking in a different direction than the other one. And although both eyes are functional, if they're not looking in the same direction at the same time, you don't have depth perception or stereo vision. So one of my agendas is to take these historic stereographs out of the archive and to put them on display. They're generally not framed and matted. And if they are, there's not really a viewing device to make that experience, to make that happen. So I developed the twin scope viewer. About 10 years ago, started thinking about it, and now I produce exhibitions of stereographs, and I also sell to museums, archives, collectors, etc., to bring the stereographs out and put them on display. All right, so making stereographs back in the 1800s, early 1900s, you can see the photographer there has his camera with 2 lenses. This is a wonderful photograph. And this was the wet plate collodion process, where you had to take a glass plate and coat it. And while it was still wet, you had to make the exposure. And then you had to actually go through the whole chemical process with the photography inside of your photographic van that he's got here. And all this was really quite complicated. How can we do this today? Don't be overwhelmed by all the text here. Let me break it down. There's basically, you've got subjects that are moving, and you've got subjects that are static. So when you're photographing buildings or flowers, well, flowers move, but anything that's really static, you can take a smartphone or a camera and take a left-hand view and then slide along and take a right-hand view. So I'll get into that technique just a little bit more as we go on. If you have a moving subject, you really need a rig, like 2 cameras that their shutters are synced and they're side by side, or dedicated 3D camera. I teach workshops on how to do stereo photography. This is analog photography. This is film photography. Students here have already taken the photograph at this point. They have a black and white film loaded into their camera. They took a left-hand view and then they shifted on their hip. It's called the cha-cha. And then the right-hand view. And then we went into the dark room and they made their prints and they mounted them. And here are a couple of wonderful examples. You can see the background, how that's shifted here. And the student stayed absolutely still and gave their camera to another student who was responsible for taking the image in this case. Another really wonderful one. And here we have foreground, middle ground, and background. And that's really important when you're composing for the 3D camera. More frequently though, it's digital stereo photography that people are interested in. And it's such an easy way to access this. Here I am at the Briscoe Western Art Museum teaching a workshop on using the smartphone and a simple printer to get these results. So I start out by looking at antique stereographs or vintage views to understand some of the photographic elements that are important to keep in mind, which are like the composition. How are the elements arranged? Is motion? What is the perspective, framing and format? So really we're just looking, we're taking a lot of time to look at these historic views and put ourselves in the position of the photographer and the choices that they made. And then we also using depth cues from regular photography, like lighting, lens selection, and leading lines. You can imagine that image that Frank showed of the Capitol there, what that might look like in 3D, how we could be going down the street and feel like there's some real depth in that image. However, if you were taking that photograph for the 3D camera, something that the historic photographers knew well, they would actually do what the black and white photograph of the young child was. You had to have them turned this way, and then you show something in the distance. So you go over their shoulder. And in fact, that's a really nice example of 3D photo. That first one that Frank showed would have been perfect in stereo. So to capture the images, I don't expect anyone to memorize this or even pay much attention, but it just gets kind of detailed in how to use the app to take each of those views. And I'll give you a link for what that app is, so you can definitely get started even today. Here are the students in the workshop using their iPhone to do the cha-cha, left image, right image. And then we went back inside. I should say this was a 4-hour workshop. 15 minutes, you're not gonna get very far, but you can introduce some things then. But if you have a good chunk of time, or you can space it out over a few weeks or several classes, then you get to the point of printing the image and actually mounting it. But this is kind of secondary. You can also just teach how to take the images and then how to look at them with a viewer clipped to your iPhone. So I can answer any questions about that. But in this case, the students are actually mounting their images to a card. And here's what we came away with 4 hours after they arrived. Card mounted 3D photographs. Looking at the historic views was really important, understanding how to read those images. For instance, the lower left-hand view, we're looking through a gate at something in the distance. And we talked about how photographers were employing techniques like leading lines and frames within frames. And so the students were really good at understanding that and using it in their own work. I'm gonna end with 3 images that I took this past year during the pandemic. And this is on my website. I call this image Sheltering in Place. It says Ivy House right here, but this is a photograph taken 4 houses down right in my neighborhood. I just walked by after a rainstorm and was kind of arrested by this image of this overgrown house. And it seemed such a metaphor for my own life, not having my hair cut and also feeling that home is kind of like a suffocating environment. Everything's overgrown and unkempt, but it's our shelter too. So this image goes with this second image inside, looking at home, an interior view of my fireplace. And my technique with these is actually to mount them right up next to each other and have them read like a 2D image that can also be viewed in 3D, but it seems to suggest a kind of surreal space. Oops. The last one isn't coming up, so that's okay, but I want to leave with my resources page. So I do want to find that if I can. Let's see here. Can you see that? Are you seeing the resources page?
Yes, yes.
Okay. There's my website if you want to look at Stereograph projects, some exhibitions of historic views, the viewer, more about the workshop that I teach, but the additional links will get you started. The 3 on the Stereoscopy blog, the top one there is for using the app called i3D Steroid if you have an iPhone. The second Stereoscopy blog link is for using that same app if you have an Android. And the third Stereoscopy blog link is for looking at stereo views, because you can also produce, you've seen these are really inexpensive anaglyph glasses. You could also make your images, instead of a stereo pair of 2 images, they're superimposed on each other, and then they're offset a little bit. And you use these very inexpensive little paper viewers to look at them. I just like making side-by-side images because I relate to them, and that's also the historic format. Let's see, Stereo World, okay, Beresin.com, that's where you can buy a lot of different types of viewing devices to look at stereo images. and a lot of other products with 3D photography. And lastly, Stereo World is the website for the National Stereoscopic Association. I'm a member, and it's a great group of people who are interested in everything from movies to Viewmaster reels to Stereographs. And there's an annual convention coming up this summer, so you can link to that with lots of workshops and fun things to get involved with. And I think that's about all I've got. I hope I didn't go over my time. Thank you so much.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. So everybody, oops. So Davida says that we can't share our screens now.
Do I have to stop sharing? Okay, I see. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, we just
That work?
to adjust. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm getting host disabled participant.
Yeah. Hang on a second, Frank. Give me 1 second. We
Okay.
wanted-
So I'll start talking. So that's absolutely wonderful. So after we go to the Whitney and meet there, can you imagine us going? Actually, my suggestion would be go to Hawaii, and imagine all the stuff that they're already doing in Hawaii, and we add this element to it. We're actually, I'm sure there are lots of historical 3D photographs from Hawaii. Imagine us taking lots and lots of these very immersive pictures that place what's going on there in this historical context. So next year, and what's it? Oh, okay, Frank, can I? Yes, I can post that. I got a thing about posting the website. Let me do that. So I'm going to put something in chat.
I think I have it. This one, Frank?
Yep, here it is. I'll send it.
Kirby.
Okay, so our goal here is we don't want this to be a bunch of us talking at you. So what we wanted to do is try and make this participatory. We'll see how this works. We're trying this for the first time. So what we'd like to do is we're going to break out into breakout groups, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Kate in a little bit, who will explain all that. What we want to do is in each breakout group, and maybe we have 4 groups of 5. Can we do that, Davida?
Sure, no problem.
And in each breakout group, you'll have a Google Doc document you can work with. And we want to put ourselves in each group in the role of our students. And what we want to do in that role is to use imagery to tell the story. So we want to use an image. You can take it right now. You can find it from your album. And you want to pick a topic for a narrative. For example, how the pandemic affected you and those close to you. So take a picture now, or find one in your photo album. You'll have to talk about this and decide what you want to put up. Put it up and then write a paragraph or 2 kind of describing what this means to you. So in a minute, I'm going to turn this over to Kate, and then we'll come back for 10 minutes of discussion. But let me put one example up. So this is a picture that means a lot to me. Early in the pandemic, I had planned to go to Orlando. We had this incredibly cool trip planned. And instead I was walking around my neighborhood, and I ducked under this branch, and I looked back, and it was really pretty. And I took a picture of it. And that to me means a lot. So one of the things that the pandemic has done for me is it's made me appreciate what's in my immediate environment. So that's my example. And now I think what I'm going to do is turn it over to Kate, and Kate will explain how we do all this. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Sure, thanks, Frank. So I will drop 2 things. I'll drop one thing into the chat. So this is the document where the groups will all be working, and I will share my screen to just show you the document for a sec. So it should be here. So we already have Anonymous Leopard working in group number 1. So once Davida splits us up into groups, we will each have our own page. And on that page, we've got instructions. So as a group, we'll pick a topic for the narrative, just like Frank was saying. We're going to try to copy Frank's model. Within the group, we can share a couple of photos on the page, and then as a group, write a paragraph or 2 as an extended caption for the image. So that's the technical way in which we'll do it. So each group gets its own page to mess around in, and hopefully we don't mess up each other's line spacing or anything. But I have a feeling it'd be okay if we just make a little mess in there. And then we'll come back and Frank will take a look at what we've done in our breakout groups. Does that sound all right, Frank?
Sounds good. I'm looking to see how I figure out where I go.
So the link is in the chat. So Davida will split us up and we'll be in breakout groups automatically in a minute.
I will. So we'll just say that each room is the breakout, it's going to be the group number, right? So room 1 will be group 1. Room
Exactly,
2.
yes. Yep.
Okay. How long do they have in the breakout rooms, folks?
10 minutes, is that what we decided?
10 minutes.
10
All
minutes.
right. 10 minutes, everybody. I'm opening the rooms right now. Let's see, who's not in a room? Okay, Usha, Sandy, Ula, and Kariun.
Davida, I'm gonna hang here and double task, and I'll learn from others when they come back. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's totally fine. I'll just pause the
Thank you.
recording.
Yeah.
Kind of reporting back as well. And that's what I've been thinking about and I've been implementing in my class. I'm teaching right now a statistics class, and I've taught this class for years, and some version or other of this project that I'm going to present, I've given in my classes over the years. But what was very interesting was the spring the pandemic hit, I was teaching this class, and midway we went remote. So half the class we were together, and then for half the class we were remote. And I gave them this assignment, and I noticed that the reports that I was getting back was really laced with the influence of what's happening during the pandemic. I was getting different types of reports, and students were collecting different types of data, and I was getting different results. And then I gave the same exact assignment again the semester after, which is fall 2020. And yet again, I saw this evolution of the stories that the students were telling me, the stories through the data and the stories, the written stories. So this was really, for me, really interesting to collect what I needed for this presentation. I kind of went through and read my students' reports again, all the way through. And it really was telling what I was seeing, this evolution of their perspective. And again, it's a snapshot in time. And without these written and visual records, how else would we preserve this for future generations? So here is the project that I gave, that I have given for years. So it was inspired by Malcolm Gladwell's book called Outliers, The Stories of Success. It's really relevant to the level of the class and the type of class that we teach at City Tech, the stats class. It's an intro level class. And I really liked Gladwell's book because he kind of digs into what makes high achievers different. And he says that we pay too much attention to what successful people are like, and not enough where they're from, their culture, their family, their generation, their upbringing. And, you know, it got me thinking that definitions of success are different. And so, you know, in the pre-pandemic times, I gave this assignment, and I really loved to see the students reporting what it means from their own cultural perspective. I always wanted my class to be a safe zone where we can have these open discussions and we can learn from each other these different perspectives of success. So I would always task groups to come together, again, random assignment, and you don't know who you're going to get in your group, and to really bring forth what they mean when they say that someone is successful. And they had to, as a group, come up with their own group definition. And so I really loved this assignment to see how this definition of success has evolved as we got deeper into the pandemic. And they had to gather, decide what data to gather and go ahead and as a group gather it. So, I have the legit, for those of you who are interested, I know that I have a few members of my stats team here. So I'm really happy to see them. We have a few mathematicians and we have scientists abounding in this discussion. So I really tried to use principles coming from, I used to be the coordinator of writing across the curriculum, co-coordinator. That is how I met Frank. Incidentally, we met at a Sensor Summer Institute one year, and fortuitously, Frank and I were seated at the same table. And so we started chatting, and Frank said, "Oh, you're working in WAC. Can you come to West Point and give a presentation to our math department?" And of course I said yes, and we were so thrilled. And the rest is history. We've been friends ever since. And so, what I have here in the scaffolding of this project is very, WAC principles here, where we have a brainstorming session. The group had to come up with their own group definition of success. How do we predict success, and how do you tell if a person has achieved success? What are your predictors and your markers? Again, thinking as a scientist, what type of data do you want to collect? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? What can you say about the data? And now you actually have to put together a prospectus. What's your hypothesis that you want to test? And what's your sample? And then I want my students to give me a plan, like what's your plan for collecting the data and how are you going to analyze it? Again, we're scientists here. You need to think like a scientist. And I don't want you to just throw together a plan as a group and run. We need to have a dialogue. Tell me why, and let's have a feedback session. And maybe we went through, for some groups, 3 iterations of this back and forth before they finally settled on an analysis plan that was appropriate. They all had to write their own individual report. Again, like we're saying here over and over again in this seminar, the voices are important. The perspectives are important. I tell my students, I want to hear your voice. It's okay if we have the same graphs. You're doing an analysis together as a group, but I want to hear your perspective. I want to hear your voice. That's what's important to me. More than, the lower order priorities like grammar errors or spelling errors. To me, those are not what I'm fixated on. I'm fixated on your voice and whether you're capturing the scientific methodology. And then students gave their presentations to each other, to the class, and they submitted their final paper. I also love that it wasn't just me grading them. Their peers also were grading them. So half their presentation grade came from me and the other half came from their peers. So it was very, very important for everyone to get a chance to have a voice and share their story. And so we said we're storytelling through data. So here are some of the results. Students were interested in looking at predictors and markers of success. Predictors could be their parent's income. And then the marker of success can be the income of the participant who's filling out the survey. And they saw there was a weak linear correlation. So one of my students, gave me this great graph. Some of them were presenting their data in pie charts. How were your grades when taking online classes and compared to their grades on campus, right? And this was very interesting to me that very few said their grades were worse. Many of them said their grades were comparable or better. Here was another very interesting graph that my students came up with, that the college graduates, you can see the demarcation here to do this jump from the $20,000 to $40,000 salary to the $40,000 to $60,000 salary. You see how all of a sudden there's a swing from the high school graduates, having the majority of this, this salary interval. And then all of a sudden it swings over where now, as we get into the higher level of salary, the college graduates are faring better than the high school graduates. This was very interesting. Again, these were questions the students wanted to answer. And they went out and decided what data to collect. And then they made the decision how they were going to present this data to us. So this is kind of very much, this project was super influenced by my exposure to sensors. So I have to do a sensor plug for this because it was such a quite amazing experience. And Davida and I also worked on kind of a sensor proposal together years back. So I want to put in that plug there. Some more data that I found very interesting. Average time spent for higher ed versus the income. This is a pretty, at least I would say this is a moderate linear correlation here that they found. Again, this is something that they're learning from. They're learning about the world through data. And so the data they collected is going to influence their decisions moving on. And I'll show you some excerpts from their written reports and you'll see how they were influenced by what they found. This was really startling. One of my students, she wrote in her paper that she was shocked. Oops, let me go back. She was shocked by this graph where the bucket of salary from $0 to $15,000 was so high. And then the rest earning more were so low. And so she's saying, okay, maybe some of the reasons could be that people are losing their jobs. We're in the middle of a pandemic. This is reflecting something that's going on right now, kind of history in the making. And then here, one of them was interested in student engagement. Are you attending your classes or not? So these are just some examples of the graphs that my students were generating. And so I did want to point out, I don't want to take too much longer. I did want to point out that the comments were amazing. So I'm really interested in this journaling project. I guess I was just really lucky to have been able to kind of collect people's thoughts during this time. The student that I mentioned where she was very shocked to observe that this bin here, this interval on her histogram from $0 to $15,000, she said, this is shocking to observe. 68% of the participants are working and they have experience. Why are they earning so little money? Comments about people being out of work during the quarantine. If I could change anything about a future study, it would be online education. I want to know what's going on. So they're trying to give their own justifications. What do you think is happening? According to me, people are being lazier. Virtual and on-campus classes are really different. I love this. If we had a chance to do it again, we would look at genders. Again, we talk a lot about this. What's going on at this moment in time? Black Lives Matter, talking about gender pay inequity. All of these discussions that we're having in class was coming back to me through their analysis, their own digesting of the material of the data that they were collecting. This student not only is living a blessing, but more times than not, you do learn something every day. During your path to doing something, you wind up doing something else. Another book that was on our book list was Range. This book, Range, and it was really incredible because it talks about people going through their educational career and then changing fields entirely, then pivoting, and then having what they learn in one field allow them to be groundbreaking innovators in other fields. And again, this discussion, again, I'm seeing echoes of everything we talked about during the semester coming out in these reports. So that was in the spring. And then in the fall, I was seeing, different things come out. People were spending a lot of time at home. So students were doing studies on gaming, right? What about gaming and productivity? What happens between high school and college? Is there a difference in gaming? One group did that. I loved that project. That wasn't what I had in my imagination when I wrote the prompt, and yet it's totally applicable and totally relevant. And I loved their project. It was so interesting. Here again, discussions of minimum wage. Again, think back to the news stories of the recent months. People were saying they were intrigued by their brainstorming discussions. And then they're looking at, again, digesting some of the statistics. So I found this to be really rewarding, really a way to engage the students, really a way to get a snapshot of what's happening during the pandemic. And it's all tied through the lens of kind of scientific inquiry, which I really loved, which goes along with, my thoughts for, running a stats class like this. It was really, really so rewarding. A few takeaways before I end. our students are listening when we discuss news events. They listen to the books we're reading. Many of them will read them and come back and discuss with you, and our own experiences, sharing with them. They are retaining this. Creating a safe space is important. Same if you're going to have them share, photographs and stereographs, having that safe space to start is going to be really important to get them to engage and feel comfortable sharing. Having a dialogue with frequent opportunities for feedback is essential. Their stories have a historical importance. This is, like I said, a snapshot in time, and they don't forget. They'll come back and they'll keep in touch with you. Different assignments that I've given, students from past semesters come back at me and say, I applied for this internship. I was inspired by such and such an assignment that I did. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? So they come back, and so what they say stays with you, and what you say stays with them. So that's my assignment in a nutshell. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Does that mean it's my turn now?
Yes, it's Kate. So Kate Poirier, she is at City Tech as well. She's one of my favorite people, of course, along with Frank. And she and I talk a lot about teaching and pedagogy and what kind of crazy, amazing assignments she's up to, she's giving in her classes. And so she has some great things to share with us. Take it away, Kate.
Thank you, Mariana. So yeah, it's really, really nice to be able to talk about my own classes right now. Mariana got me in touch with Frank just like a month or two ago, because she was like, I think you would have some stuff to talk about. And yeah, obviously we do. So I'm going to share some assignments that I gave to my class in fall 2020 and that I'm giving again right now, that I think sort of dovetail nicely with the Grassroots Histories. So I'm gonna do a couple of things. I've got slides with lots of links. So if anyone likes to follow along or wants to click on any of the links, I'm putting the link to my slides in the chat. So a lot of us, of course, in the last year, that's not what I meant to do, sorry, present, that's what I'm doing. A lot of us in the last year have been, doing our best to keep our students engaged in our courses and engaged in what we're doing, engaged in the world. And yeah, I'm just going to share a couple of things that I've been doing that seem to be working. Oh, and I always have this trouble when I am, there we go, sharing. So I was really shocked to say this at the end of fall 2020, that it was probably the most rewarding semester of my teaching career. And from one perspective, I didn't even teach. I really, really pushed myself to do things differently. So it felt a bit weird, but I think it really, really worked. So just a snapshot of the setting of my Calculus 2 class was 100% online, about 30 students. I'm teaching it again with the same structure this semester. So last semester was an experiment and it seemed to work really well. So I'm doing it again now. I would say it was kind of a flipped classroom, kind of like sloppily flipped, but most of the students were doing their learning asynchronously, at least their first contact with the material. So the course hub is just like where the lessons live, which is something I wrote over the summer. We meet twice per week, but the way that I've split it up is that we only have one meeting as a class per week. And then the other meeting, the students have fixed small groups and they have some group assignment to do every week. But one of the things that's majorly different about what I've been doing in this class is every week students are giving me one-on-one presentations. They have a portfolio of questions that they are working through. I can give a plug for web work here. They are randomized questions. So it takes a lot of time for me. I'm spending 10 to 12 hours a week sitting in these meetings with students, but I think that has really sort of helped to establish some really important connections. And I could talk about that for a very long time, but today I'm going to talk about the heavy use of our class blog. At City Tech, we have a platform called the Open Lab, which I use a lot. And I know some of my City Tech colleagues also use it a lot. So if I say the Open Lab, what I mean is our class website or our class blog. So again, that's the part I want to talk about, but I do want to emphasize that I think that there need to be connections established sort of like at any possible opportunity. So there's the student to instructor, these one-on-one presentations that my students are giving to me. I'm really, really getting to know them as individuals. So I have given a bunch of Zoom high fives when they've been able to like crack a problem that they've been struggling with, but I've also met I've met some family members. I've met Princess the Yorkie, who was super adorable, and I've actually played with Nugget the kitten, who's still young enough to be interested in screens. So that's like, you know, silver linings to the pandemic. We have connections everybody to everybody, like during class time, student to student, these small groups that meet once a week with like a pretty small low stakes assignment. They are establishing those connections. So those are mostly happening synchronously, but they also have their WhatsApp groups, their Discord servers, they have shared Google Docs. So they're doing that stuff outside of class time as well. And I'm going to take you through some examples of what I'm calling these human assignments, which I see as a connect everybody to everybody connection. It's happening on the class blog and they're asynchronous. Oh yeah, and this image is shamelessly just like ripped off from an Instagram account that I love called Orange Juice for Dinner. So if you like it, I encourage you to follow them. But this is what our connections sort of look like right now. So what is a human assignment? Well, these were sort of like I didn't have sort of a big picture in mind last semester when I started giving them. They're small, like low stakes assignments, usually not based on course material, but somehow are related to the course or students' lives or math or something in some kind of way. So after the fact, I kind of shuffled them into two different types of assignments. And I should say that all of them are low stakes. Students have many ways to earn participation credit in my classes, and completing assignments like this, you know, whatever they submit, they can earn participation credit if they want. If they don't want, there are other things that they can do to earn that credit if this is not for them. So the ones that are starred are the ones that I'm hoping to have time to talk about today. I think I do. So one of the course related ones that was really fun, and it was neat. It was really neat to see what the students did with it. So Math 1575 is the Calculus 2 class at City Tech. Math 2680 is the differential equations class that has Calculus 2 as a prerequisite, like really, really requires it as a prerequisite. So most students take them in consecutive semesters. And I happened to be teaching both of those classes last semester. So I was like, okay, what can I do with this? So I gave this one assignment where, well, I had class blogs for both classes. So the assignment, there were some specific instructions, but generally the assignment was to post on the other class's site. So this was on the differential equations website, but the instructions for the differential equations students were not here. They were over on the Calculus 2 site. And likewise for the Calculus 2 students. So for this is the instructions for the older students. And it was basically just pretend you are a Calculus 2 student. You've been through Calculus 2 before. What unsolicited advice do you have to give to these students? And the differential equation students like went for it. So for this assignment, it was just to post a comment on this post. So you can see like Oscar like went for it. He introduced himself. He gave some really practical advice, like have a notebook that has a very terse refresher, limit one technique per page. But he also like opened up. I didn't do very well, and that has led to my lack of confidence. You know, this is something he's saying to complete strangers on the internet, which I thought was like really incredible. Yeah, some of my other students like, look how much Sierra wrote. Like I was like, oh, just write a paragraph or something, and they wrote this. So always start with a positive mindset. If you guys need any of help with your studies, I'm a peer advisor. So there's like, you know, all of these students, Sierra, I happen to know, was in Florida during this time. So all of these students not even on campus can start connecting with each other, even students who are outside their own classes. So what I like about this is that it helps the students who are especially in the Calculus 2 class to sort of see that as part of like a spectrum of their learning, and that their community isn't just the people in their own classes. Yeah, I was really happy with this. The Calc 2 students were asked, I asked them to like ask questions. So you can see Katie was a Calculus 2 student. and Sierra like answered some of her questions. Here's some like Sierra's amazing. But yeah, it's like Pablo, what are some real uses of differential equations? And like my differential equations student, Fabio, answered that question rather than me answering that question, which I think holds a lot more weight. So that type of assignment I think is really fun to give, and it like really leverages it leverages the Open Lab, that a platform like that, that's not just sort of some static thing that is only accessible to students in the class or something, really allows for this sort of like collaboration. I won't click on it, but this is another assignment that's very similar, where I had my Calculus 2 students at the end of last semester post something, and then the Calculus 2 students at the beginning of this semester went back and looked at what they posted and commented on that. So again, it allows the students in both of those classes to see themselves sort of as part of a larger community. So my two very, very favorite ones, I think I have time to go through them. I'll try to go quick. Black and Math Week. So this was an event on Twitter last semester. I think this will load, yes. So the Black and Math account hosted an event on Twitter, and you can see that there were different sort of themes throughout the week where anyone in the Black and Math community could post. So like introducing themselves, my Black math journey, I look like a mathematician. This was totally awesome. And yeah, I was so excited to turn this into an assignment for my students. So the assignment here was to go to Twitter. They don't have to have a Twitter account. All of these are public tweets where they could go and like pick somebody who participated in the event on Twitter to profile. And I explained this to them. I was like, why are we doing this? Because it's awesome, but also because, okay, you're in a calculus class. If we say any names of humans at all in this class, they're gonna be like Newton or Leibniz or Taylor or something. Like they're gonna be dead, white dudes. And that is the exact wrong impression to give our students of like what a mathematician is. Like, what is a mathematician? Also someone who's going to be participating in this awesome event on Twitter. So these are Black mathematicians, math educators, people in the math community who are alive and active and energetic and doing stuff right now. So that's the image I want to leave my students with. And the students, oh yeah, this is, MC Hammer got in on this. He is active in the Black in STEM community on Twitter. So it's pretty exciting when your friend gets retweeted by MC Hammer. I asked the students, do you know who MC Hammer is? And most of them said yes. So you can see that they are profiling. They had to find something that they couldn't find on Twitter. They had to find out other stuff about these people to profile. And I wanted to go to Jaquan's, where's Jaquan? Okay, Jaquan. Jaquan was an absolutely lovely student that I got to know pretty well during this semester. Just like, I was so lucky to have him in the class. So he profiled Dr. Neera Chamberlain. And like he said, this made me cry when I saw it. Because of these posts, he's an engineer. Because of these posts, I'm finding a new respect for mathematicians as a whole. I am finally discovering my new heroes. Oh my God, like if your student says that, then you have to give them assignments that get this reaction from them. So another fun thing about the Open Lab is it's open. So after my students submitted these profiles, I went on Twitter and I contacted the people who had been profiled and I was like, hey, could you respond to my student's profile of you? So you can see Neera Chamberlain wrote right back, thank you, Jaquan, for this kind summary of my career. Oh, it was so nice. I want to show you Katie's too, I just have to. So Katie profiled Noelle Sawyer, and she got to know not just about Noelle Sawyer's work as a mathematician, but just like how she presents herself publicly. And so Noelle said, I've never sounded cooler than I sound in your comment here. This is great. Katie was so excited about this, that she got a response from the person that she was profiling. So this is like one of my most favorite assignments I've ever given. So I gave like a similar one this semester for Black History Month. And I think, yeah, I might get in touch with the people who were profiled to comment on the students' work. I mean, we want students to think about math as like a living, breathing thing that real people do. And this is one of the ways that we can do it. Okay, one more assignment. This one was a bit I don't know, it was a bit hard for me to decide to do this assignment, but it ended up being like extremely valuable. I mean, that's like one of the things, like I've never really given assignments like this before that are where I like don't have any control over like what the students do with it. So that's a new sort of like unfamiliar, a little bit uncomfortable place for me. But once I saw how the students responded, I was like, okay, this is something I'm bringing forward like after pandemic for sure. Yeah, in these one-on-one meetings with my students, there was one week where I don't know what it was. 3 of my students, as they were talking with me, said this about themselves. They said, I'm bad at math. And I was like, no. Like we're gonna put a pin in that right now. So I wanted to give this assignment to have students like really sort of probe like where these thoughts might be coming from and like what service they're fulfilling in their lives. But this one could be a kind of personal. So I gave them the background, and what was hard for me was like, I needed to tell them that they were like not alone in having these thoughts. And so I told them like, I've said this about myself. So that was like, I had to get vulnerable here. And I will say like, this was not the first assignment that I gave. Like we had built this like foundation of trust, sort of like creeping up to something more and more personal. So I'm glad I let them know that this is the situation I find myself in too. So for an assignment like, oh yeah. So the background, do this right now. Do a Google image search for mathematician. Scroll until you see someone who looks like you. Can you find anyone? I haven't seen all of your faces on Zoom, but I'm willing to bet that none of you look like this bro. This is who I found when I did a Google image search for a mathematician. So for this assignment, and for assignments like this that are like, can be kind of personal, I do want to make sure that I give students choices for how to engage. Do they want to like not get personal at all, but still respond to the prompt? There should be something for them there. If they want to get personal, then they can. So like read an article on math anxiety. Some of the students went that route. This is their choices. Go back to your Google image search for mathematician and learn about a person who looks like you. So sort of similar to the Black and Math Week one. But the third prompt was like, okay, let's get personal. Have you ever thought this? Have you ever said it out loud? What do you do to challenge these thoughts? How can we support people when they feel like this? And most of the students went with this one, like they got personal. And I was like just really proud of them for like writing such thoughtful things. So who's did I want to, there was somebody. Oh, Aaron, yeah, Aaron brought up stuff that I hadn't even thought of. So he connected math anxiety with how stressed out standardized tests made him as a middle schooler. Like that's his experience with math, you know? So taking math tests is, yeah, not the best place for someone like Aaron. And he's able to articulate that in response to, you know, this prompt. I think Sahar is one of the strongest students I've ever had at City Tech. And I've definitely thought this multiple times, but she probed it. And I work in the tutoring center, so I was able to hire her as a tutor after the first semester when I had her. People really do struggle with stuff that we find simple. Nothing is impossible, so saying I can never do it is not the way out. Maybe one more. Aram told me he spent an hour working on this. Like with these assignments, I've been like, if you want to spend 10 minutes, spend 10 minutes. You don't have to spend a long time, but he really, really engaged with this. There are countless moments when I did say I'm terrible at math. But of course, by the end, he's like, oh yeah, he wrote the most thoughtful stuff. People who are going through this situation, I believe we can help them by showing empathy and showing them a way that anyone can understand math. It just requires more time, practice, and more perseverance. It's like, this is like amazing, like that he's so thoughtful and so vulnerable and so open about this. So when I was looking back at these assignments to prepare for this talk, I was just like, oh yeah, these students. So I'm in the middle of it with my students this semester doing similar kinds of things. And I'm getting like similar kinds of responses. So yeah, more assignments are linked in the slides, which the link to the slides is in the chat. Can I go back here? So some findings, if we ask students what they think, they'll tell us. that was a new thing for me. But we do need a foundation of trust. They need to know their voices are valued, and we need to give them these opportunities. And for me, especially, but I think for everybody, we want students to bring their full selves to their classes. And right now their classes are literally inside their homes. So why don't we ask them about more human things? This is a quote from a talk I went to yesterday. Building a community takes a community. And I think that is sort of for any community at all levels. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Rochelle Gutierrez's work on rehumanizing mathematics. That has like a huge, much bigger scope than what I'm talking about here, and does relate more with like actual course content. But I grabbed this quote: when teachers can recognize a student's unique perspective alongside of the equally important to a mathematician's or math educator's view, there's a greater potential for connection between the teacher, student, and new possible forms of mathematics. So I think this goes along with exactly what Frank and Mariana have been saying about like making sure that students have a voice and that they recognize that their contributions are valued, like at sort of any level, right? So thank you so much. This is another shamelessly stolen illustration from the same account, and I think this is the one that embodies me the most when I'm on Zoom. So thank you. So I will stop sharing and hand things back over to Frank.
So thank you very much. This is really exciting. I really want to thank Colleen and Kate and Mariana. You're some of my favorite people in the whole world. This is really, really, really fun. So before we break, we hit our 4 o'clock mark. I did put a URL in the chat for a website that we have, and I'll just quick share that so we can take a look at it. And this is basically a website that's for this, some general stuff in the beginning, and then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see there are 3 fairly detailed quick projects. So those are PDF files, and this is a growing collection. So let me see, I'm going to stop sharing. I want to thank you all for coming. This has been a really, really good group. We're just about out of time. I think I should turn this back over to Eliza and Davida if they have any closing words. And just thanks, everybody. This has been really fun. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Oh, and one last thing, we'll send out email to everybody on our list with the URLs and some links and things like that.
Thank you, Frank. This was awesome. We all feel really inspired and happy and joyous, and it was a wonderful thing to watch. We loved it. So
It's really, really good.
really, really. So folks,
Yeah.
thank you all for coming. So we're pretty much on the wire now to finish. We're going to, this has been recorded. We will share the recording via YouTube as soon as we can. And we encourage you all to stay in touch with Frank and Co and keep the good work going. We will be following this event with another event, hopefully in April, and there will be another one in May. And we hope to see you all at those as well. And don't forget to register for Sensor in the summer. We'll hope to see you all at the conference. All right. Nice to meet you all.
Bye all. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Frank, for organizing this. Is very helpful.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, baby. I'll stop the recording now.